Welcome. I hope you're here for Time to Good DX. So you're in the right place. We've heard a lot about developer experience so far here at SpringOne 2019, and we're really excited to share some personal experiences with you today. So we'll get right into it. Hi, I'm Claire Moss. I'm a senior software developer at the Home Depot, and I'm very passionate about developer experience, having that all day long in the various tools that I need to author and promote my code to production.
I'm Cheryl Spruce. I'm a product manager at the Home Depot, supporting the developer experience and helping making software engineers' life easier. So, welcome.
So here's what we think a typical day looks like. So you'll have to sanity check us on this. So we're assuming that since you're here at SpringOne, you're probably building software and that you are working on a team that has common goals where you have all the skill sets needed to deliver. And as we heard in the keynote this morning, some of those include product management and user experience. So I don't know does this sound familiar to you? Do you have all of these? If you don't have them within your team, sometimes there are more like an agency model where there's a group within the company that might share someone out to you or not have a permanent person assigned to your team. And so that does create cross-team dependencies that can get in the way of delivering effectively for customers.
So how could we improve the overall developer experience? Well, we can do that with UX, user experience. What is UX? It's a philosophy that is used for used in the product process that allows us to really connect to the user, and so we can have empathy for them, and it helps us to diverge into what their needs are and actually have feelings for them also. Why does it matter? It matters because at the end of the day, our products should fulfill the user's needs, and it helps lead to a better experience, and without users we really don't have any products. So,
and as we know, developers love to tell you about their problems. Yep. So if you have an effective developer experience, then you're going to have loyal users who will recommend and promote your products. And we know that information about research from the industry and just personal experience, devs are very influenced by the opinions of their peers. So it's important to have that recommendation and that social support.
So Claire, what is DX?
So why is developer experience a thing? How is it not just UX? Well, we definitely have had this conversation with people in the community and on our own teams. And yes, DX is UX where the developers are the customers and users of the product, but those products tend to be quite different. So we heard in the keynote today that, that there are often graphical interfaces and command line interfaces available for the same stack. And they can enable the same kinds of behavior, but you might have completely different demographics of users for those aspects of your product. So not only is it a separate interface for the user, but there's also a different perspective that we're trying to manage. So DX is really focused on modern technology and standards. These are things that we as developers are advocating for and sharing within our cross-functional teams. And you hear this on podcasts like Don't Make Me Code. There's a whole subgenre of UX out there that's catering to developer experience. So I don't know if we have anyone here who's building dev tools these days, but certainly we have heard quite a lot about that here at the Spring platform. So in what circumstance are we trying to manage this developer experience within a balanced team? So we have several different concerns that we're trying to manage as a team. We have questions like, is it viable? Will it help the business? Should we even do this? Is it desirable? Does it actually satisfy anyone's needs? And is it feasible? Close to my heart. Should we even build this? Can we build this? So do we have the technology? Are we going to effectively be able to deliver on this? If you have all of these together in a balanced team, those may be represented as separate individuals, or it may be something that you are managing within just a set of engineers. So sometimes it's more of an engineering initiative and not necessarily a product team. But we do know, as we heard earlier, that product thinking is very important to include. So Cheryl, how can product thinking help us here?
Well, first of all, product through process helps us deliver value. And at the end of the day, we want our products to be valuable for our users. Also, it helps us to really define what the problems are and solve those problems again for the users. What do our customers want? It helps us, product helps us narrow into that also. And it helps us get to the point where we're achieving the outcomes that we want. So really, how does that help teams?
Well, we as developers can help to answer the feasibility question that our business representatives might have. So that is not just can we do it, but how hard is it to do, and how can we make it easier to get there? What kinds of things can we do to lower that barrier to entry? So if we're focused on this developer experience that we share as developers, how can we help our team members who don't have those day-to-day responsibilities to relate to this experience?
So Claire, who is that person? How do we find out who that person is?
Well, we're borrowing this UX tool.
Okay.
So how do we use that UX tool to help us in our product thinking?
Well, it helps us personify the user. It helps us target who that user really is. As you know, me as a product manager can be one kind of product manager who's a tech product manager. You might have another product manager who's business. The same with devs. You may have a dev who's in college, or a dev that is coding UIs, or a dev is back end. So it's really important when you're building things, especially for devs or helping developers, you understand what those needs are so you can diverge into the specifics. The persona allows us to do that. It allows us to flush those things out to understand what their behaviors are, what demographic, what their goals and desires are. So that's why we use the persona.
And this is relatable for me because it's more like a prototype of our user. We're trying to think of a way to relate to people, and it's something of a hypothesis unless we already have research from the field to show us what our users are actually doing and what they're actually asking for. So that can help us figure out how to target them.
Right, so Claire, who are we targeting?
Well, we are trying to work through what is a developer. This is a big overarching category of users. So as we mentioned, there are many different demographic differences. There are different concerns. This is actually in your handout. So if you have your handout, you can look at page 2. And we have a sample developer persona there. This is based on our experiences and on some industry research. So some key demographic factors when we're looking at developers are usually these people are individual contributors. That's our largest user base, and we want to impact the most people that we can. So we want to take into account their interests and capabilities. So that innovative learning and embracing technology is really important, not just for their team, but also because we're probably collaborating across code bases. So I don't know if we have any open sourcers in here. We've heard a lot about open source today, but often you are collaborating with people who you don't necessarily have the same context with, so that's very important to manage as well. And they need to have quick feedback, need to be able to move quickly and more easily integrate. So these are things that we have seen in our experience, but we're very interested in what you're bringing. So we want to get some focus on the kinds of experiences you're having. So on that sheet that you have on the front, there is a blank persona. And so we're going to take about 5 minutes and let you think about the kinds of users who are whether it's your personal experience or the dev tools that you're building, that these are aspects of the user base that you're going to need to manage. And this is helping us as developers to embrace that product thinking.
And when you're doing this, keep in mind the friction and the bad experience too, not just what makes you happy, because part of this is to really understand what problems that you're having as a developer.
All right, so we're going to take a few minutes. If you'd like, we'll circulate a little bit and answer any questions you have. No pressure if you haven't finished up. People often take many interviews and many weeks to do this kind of work. So this is just sketching out some ideas. So we'll come back to our template for the developer experience, or I'm sorry, the developer persona for our experience. And we're interested, is there something that surprised you about our example, or in reflection, considering your users? Was there something that jumped out at you as being significantly different from other user groups?
Does anyone want to share what some of their pain points might have been?
All right.
Anybody?
Well, we've
Okay, we got someone?
In our organization, a lot of our developers are very insular and kind of timid, and they don't ask very good questions. They are just everything given to them, so they don't ever have to interact with them.
Okay, so in a more contained experience.
We've got this very go out and talk to people. Only a few of our developers, a lot of them are like, no, I don't. Just give me my thing. Here's my little box. I don't know where everything outside my box works.
Okay, so familiarity with that particular team or context, but not interested in asking a lot of questions or going outside of that comfort zone and expecting more structure around that. Sound right? Okay. So we looked at some developer pain points that are more, some of them are interpersonal and some of them are very specific to the implementation or the way that you're providing information to your users. So one thing that surprised me was how urgent and important documentation can be. So who enjoys writing docs? Did you raise your hand during that keynote? Okay, so I'm one of the few people who raised my hand during the keynote as writing things down, but I'm also known for live tweeting, so it's my habit to write everything down. So we know from working with other devs that documentation is not our favorite part of the problem solving. We really enjoy getting that solution out the door, and sometimes that can mean that documentation is an afterthought. And that means that for our users who need that reference, that it's not available to them. So that can be very difficult to onboard someone, especially, or just even have a new feature coming out. Maybe they're already familiar with your platform, your product, and a new behavior is available to them, but they don't know how to leverage it. So communication with people is more of the call out that you had around what gets in our way of being able to socialize information. There's also simple things like being able to access a system. Do you have an environment where you can work? Do you have access to the doc site? Do you even know where to find the information? Adopting new technology. Sometimes people like to say something's impossible when it's just unfamiliar, because it feels safer to say that it can't be done than to say, I don't know. And that can be a coaching opportunity or a mentoring opportunity. If you have someone on your team who's more excited about exploring, then that can be a great opportunity for them to grow and take a leadership position on even just this one feature or this one aspect of the product. And as you mentioned, getting siloed can be a challenge there as well. So we don't want to dwell. We know that devs love to complain, and we love to chat about that, but we want to move forward from it. So,
That's right.
Cheryl, how can we do better?
Well, first of all, we want to slice away all the bad parts to achieve the smooth guacamole. With that said, as developers and for DX, we would like things focused. We don't really want to, we want to hide the complexities of things. We want processes and tools to be simple, efficient, effective, almost like the self-service is an example of that. We want things to be more flexible, automated. We want to remove all the administrative tasks if we can, so we can concentrate on building out product features. And good docs, like Claire mentioned, are good also, because then when developers want to, like with an API, consume it, they really don't have to worry about certain things on, using the endpoint, or have to dig or sort out to find people to help them.
So an example of this in my life is when I first learned to use Cloud Foundry. So we
yes.
have this CF push that we heard in the keynote is sacred, right?
Yep.
So this is something that a lot of people depend on and needs to be very clear, where convention over configuration can make your life a lot better. However, my team wants to push to multiple environments. So we have an app manifest that's going to correspond to a particular environment. So we want to be able to use some of those more advanced features, I guess. It's just not the default. So while it may not seem like a complex addition to the system, it certainly gives us that flexibility, and making those options available and discoverable is really helpful to our users. So even if it's just a man page, you can make a better man page than just whichever order in which you implemented those flags. You could group them by purpose or keep them together in a way that helps the user to find the information quickly. And as we mentioned, there are also graphical interfaces or support options. And so here's an example from the Stripe API of all of these different characteristics that enable developers to be effective. So we have a focused purpose that explains the need. It's very simple to get in touch with people to continue to get updates. It's supported. You can see that feedback is going back to the development team and people are managing this experience. The authentication section is an example of being effective so that it's open to read but closed to use. It keeps it right there. All those details that you need to get going are right there, and it's easy to discover them because it's organized in a workflow that's familiar, and with the idea that onboarding should be very simple. And so on the right-hand side, you see those code samples that we heard about in the keynote this morning, that different tech stacks require different tweaks, and so having those ways to accelerate someone to quickly adopt a tool is very helpful. So I can just efficiently grab those code samples, pop them into my solution, and get going without too much friction. So how do we get to good?
Yep.
We don't necessarily have that state in our products, but we want to make it happen. So we need some help. And who can help us with this?
I don't know. Who would you go to? Who are your DX allies, sorry. Allies in your network?
So if you take
Yeah.
a look at your worksheet, there is a little graph
Yep.
of your DX allies. And so think about the people who are available to you in your context. And this is going to be very specific to your teams, the structure of your application, the way that you interface with other people in those cross-platform dependencies. So we'll take a few minutes to ponder what humans could help us here.
And just some examples would be like you would go to your boss, your manager, those kind of,
So that would be a pretty
Folks.
typical one.
yeah, that's a typical. So you'll see the handout. You can, with the bubbles, fill out who you think your allies are.
Wrapping this up, we found that there were several different people who immediately came to mind for people in our organizations and our teams, people we talked to. And who were those people, Cheryl?
My boss,
Right?
my manager.
Or my manager. I'm a dev manager, or I have a dev manager. And so people on my team I would go to might be my pair for programming, or maybe a mentor in the organization. Mostly in the developer org. That seemed to be pretty comfortable. And yet, aren't there other people who could help us? Who would you suggest?
How about your product manager?
But how could you help me with developer experience as a product manager?
Let's see. So did anyone out, when you were filling out your sheet, come up with product manager? Just curious. Yay.
Every now and then we get that
We're-
response, but it's not the
We're your
most
advocate.
common.
That guy's the product manager.
So
Oh, is he?
I don't know if he's a plant or not.
Yeah.
But if you take a look at your worksheet, we have this sample persona, so you can note on it as you see fit. But tell us more about what's important about this perspective. Why is product thinking helpful here?
As a product manager, I help the team, I guide the team to deliver the product and deliver value. But I also keep everyone aligned to what the overall vision and strategy is. I also help on the day-to-day. I help developers prioritize the work, manage their backlog. Also, I am the representative of the business and the users, both. So I speak the language of the business. I love to solve problems for our users. So I help flush that out, and I help define what that is and what problems we will solve for the business. Also, I do research, I look at data just to help us stay forward thinking in what features we should work on next.
And I think that's such an important call out
Yeah.
because as a developer, it would be so great if I could just jump straight to the solution
Oh, yes.
and leave the problem definition in someone else's capable hands. And yet, I need to be able to embrace that and internalize it so I can help to improve it and guard that when I'm making decisions in the code base. So, what kind of persuasive argument am I trying to make when I'm working with someone who's not from the developer background? Well, I have to make a business case. And I don't know if anyone has coached you on this. This comes up a lot with devs that I work with and have known in my personal life. So having that common language is really helpful. Being able to describe the value of something is a call out that I hear most often from product, where it seems to be more implicitly obvious. Like if we're saying, hey, this technology is more capable, or we have an opportunity to leverage a new feature, that seems like a no-brainer perhaps to someone who is really deep in the technology. But in order to get that information through to the whole team, we have to communicate it a little bit more in the way that it aligns to the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So to help us with this, we have a little role play.
Oh, I might need my props.
All right.
I'm talking to an engineer now.
So I'm a developer, and she's a product manager, but we don't work on the same team. I am trying to integrate with her API, and it would be super helpful if I could get a little bit of a change into the system.
Okay.
Hey, Cheryl. I'm trying to integrate with your API, and I'm having a problem. I know it's a facade, and there was an error in one of the downstream systems. But when I got the response, the HTTP code was 200, and everything looked fine. And so I didn't even check the payload to see whether the error code was in there. And it's driving me nuts to have to do all this extra logic around it. So could you just change the HTTP code to reflect the error message at the top level? That would be great. It's pretty simple, and you can easily prioritize it.
Well, I think we just have to have a meeting and pull all of the devs in and the product folks.
More meetings.
I don't think it's a priority to put in my backlog.
It seems
my
like such a
features.
small change.
Well, I just don't think, based off what you just told me, it's not a priority. But hey, if you want to go back and just schedule some time, have a meeting, and we can have a 4-hour session and work it out.
Oh, 4 hours sounds great. Okay, so at the end of this conversation, I did not get what I wanted. I'm definitely feeling blocked and frustrated, and that's not where I want to be. So, is there anything that I could do to improve my outcomes here?
Go talk to her devs.
Right, so I could just back channel. Right, so it's super easy. I have a chat program. I know who's on her team. And I can just be like, hey, buddy, just let her know that, this is not that hard. It's fine. It's totally fine. So we have another suggestion. And if you take a look at your worksheet, there's a communication plan, and then there's how to talk to product managers. So training wheels there. It's like a Mad Lib. I don't know if anyone enjoys those fill in the blanks, but we even have a word bank for you of the kinds of keywords that can get through. So it's really important to consider the purpose of your communication. So my goal is to change the behavior and to get my colleague to prioritize my need. So I need to think about what's the purpose of the message, but the first thing about that is who's the audience. And so getting through to a product manager, the value of the change is totally different than communicating with my dev compatriot on that team. Would be much lower friction. And yet, the devs pointed me to the product manager. So we have this separate role of someone who is guiding the vision and prioritizing the features. So if I want to get through, I need to consider those potential barriers of the jargon that I'm spewing. Like, that might not fit with someone else's experience and understanding, and how I'm going to deliver the message. If I come in guns blazing saying, like, listen, this is not that hard, and yeah, I've been fighting your code for 4 hours, let's have another 4-hour meeting, this is not going to work out so well for me. And then I need to check for understanding. So I wasn't actually looking to see whether Cheryl was getting my message, so that's on me to work through. So we're going to try that again and see what kinds of outcomes we can get. So, all right, scene.
All right. Props again.
So using my handy rubric. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, Claire.
I'm really excited about integrating with your API. And
Okay.
I'm running into some friction, and I was hoping you could help me.
Okay.
So, as a developer,
Tell me more.
my biggest problem is I can't tell there's an error when it's happening. So I need some help with making things more visible so that we can make fewer calls to your system. And I'd like that to be a different technical solution, but I understand that's a little bit more involved. So I would like, the value of doing this is to improve the outcomes for all your users so that you don't have to worry about scaling up so much, and you don't have to spend as much money on the environments and the run costs. But this will help us to accomplish our goals by being able to get a quicker response to our users. That you are, so you're supporting us, but we're also supporting our users. And it would be a great feature to prioritize.
Tell me more. Oh, we should get together. You said it would provide value. What benefits do I get?
So this would be faster, it would be more efficient, it would be lower cost, and it would delight our users.
Okay, so why don't we do this? Why don't we just get the other product manager and your dev, let's sit down now and go through and work through what the impact is and how it would be valuable for us to do this now.
Oh, the impact. So do you think it would be fine if, like, I love that you're on board with this. Do you think it would be okay if the other users can't use the API while that change is going in? Because it would actually break them.
Oh, well, yeah, we need to really think about that if it's going to break things. And if there's an impact, and what's the plan of, like, turning things on and off and implementing this without impact to the users?
Yeah, I guess this would put us into our API management workflow.
Yes.
It just seems like such a small thing, but I can see that we need to talk through this more. So,
Well, let's talk more, because I
Okay.
think this is important.
yeah, I think
Don't
we
you?
can get more value out of this. So not quite the outcome I was hoping for, but it is a much more informed conversation, a better partnership, and an opportunity to try to move all of our goals forward. So there are probably examples that you've seen where you don't necessarily have support for API migration, or you don't necessarily know who all the users are for your product. So that I'm conscious that there are other people, and that my product manager is concerned about the long-term viability and how it will help the company is really important for me to consider when I'm advocating for a change. Because if I get exactly what I want and no one else is expecting it, then we have broken contracts between the APIs, and we may or may not have a system in place to alert us to that.
Yep.
So we'd rather find out sooner through human connection than to wait for a CI process to tell us that we're violating our contracts. So we find that even though we are able to get that common understanding and advocate for a better developer experience, that we might not necessarily end up with exactly the changes we demanded. Unfortunately, the words are not enough. There's a lot more to consider with those different perspectives. And that's why I need my product manager to help bring that product thinking into the picture, because it's such a simple solution. But does it actually suit the problem? Yes.
It's almost like you're doing user-centered design with your developers as your users.
Yeah, so
Oh.
user-centered design with developers as users.
I may,
Yes.
may not be a plant lover.
Perhaps. So thank you for that question
Yes.
or comment. So we are thinking about ways for developers to get more familiar with this process, because if we're trying to internalize this product thinking, then where is a safe space for us to practice? Maybe not with someone I'm working with where I need a success outcome, because if I come in swinging and I haven't really thought that through, then that can really impact my success long term in these team interactions. So we have a proposal. It's Hacktoberfest, as I see our attendee here is aware. So if you are looking to practice advocating for features and looking at them from a long-term viability standpoint, open source is encouraging people to contribute in a lot of ways right now. So pull requests are just one way to support open source. Reviewing issues and engaging in conversations around them is really valuable. So one way that I could have done better is that I could have suggested a request for comment workflow. So we've heard this from the folks at Heroku, that it's really helpful to say, a proposal I have for the system is, this facade API is not surfacing errors in a way that is as effective for my team. I would propose that we make the errors top level. And then other devs from other teams could comment in that public sphere and get those concerns, those technical roadblocks out there so that we could make a more informed decision for the entire user community, who happen to be devs. But it's really important to make that communication transparent. And one place to do that in a safe space is to practice with open source. Now, it's easy to flame people on the internet, so keep that in mind. There's a lot of ways to review pull requests or suggest comments, and we want to abide by those contributing agreements and those expectations for code of conduct for the different projects. So go review some pull requests, make some feature requests. I recommend that you do the request for comment workflow, create an issue first before you just show up with a PR, because it's great to contribute to the code, but if no one understands why it's important, and if you don't realize it's a breaking change, then it would be really easy to do a lot of work without getting the benefit.
Okay, so that's it for the workshop and presentation. Just a few takeaways. I just want to leave you with, remember, you are your best advocate. So go out there and fight for what you need, but you have to have a voice to do that. So I recommend, as developers, you use that voice and interact with your product manager or others on the business side.
And I guess that's really an important point to make, that because we as developers don't necessarily have that background in product thinking, the people you're engaging with in open source or even another team in your company might not have that perspective as well.
Yep.
So being able to defend it from both a viability and a feasibility standpoint is really helpful to bring that well-rounded conversation. And it would be more persuasive to say this actually aligns to business outcomes to help those devs who are willing to buy into your request to go to their business partners or their product manager and say, hey, I want to prioritize this. Or if it's a maintainer of a repo, to show why this would be really helpful. So we have some resources for you to dig into this more, but we're definitely ready to take questions if anyone has any. Is this a familiar process? Are you already using this at your office?
I think a lot of it's probably organic, right? We talked a lot about the human aspect.
Yeah.
So probably a lot of people are just realizing that they're doing it already, just without.
Okay, so you might already be negotiating, but maybe your first point of attack for the tactics is to back channel through development because that's more familiar. And then when you find that that's a roadblock, or your buddy says, "Ooh, maybe I shouldn't push in features that no one has approved," or if it gets to the product manager and that story gets rejected, then that would be pretty disappointing. So coming to it from a value standpoint can definitely strengthen your argument, make your PR easier to accept, and make it more likely that you're going to get the value that you were hoping for, and not waste your time and energy. So in a 4-hour meeting.
I will say that it seems like in your example, you didn't get what you wanted either way. It's just the PM punished you less. It was she punished you with 4 hours. And the others were
That's
still
true.
there.
So I'm not saying this is an antidote to all meetings, right? But what we can do is have a better agenda going into the conversation to know what outcomes we're trying to achieve and actually spend that time on worthwhile interaction rather than trying to ending up with an impasse of the different vocabulary and not being able to embrace each other's perspective, because it would be really easy to say, well, there are more of us than there are of you. But we're trying to work as a team, and it's not a democracy as much as we'd like to see that more in open source. So any other comments or questions? Have you seen a workflow like this in open source or among engineering initiatives when there isn't a product manager present?
Ours is larger than any we have product managers for different parts of our system.
Okay.
We have a community process as part of Apache where we negotiate changes that we think are more architectural in scope.
Okay, so sometimes it might be managed as a community process, and the concerns that you're managing are more architectural in nature, or at least that's how they're presented.
That's what triggers us to
Okay.
go through that process.
So if
That's not necessarily the thing that initiated
sure.
the idea, but when it has an architectural impact, that's when we are more likely to do it.
Yeah. Well, Martin Fowler says that architecture is the stuff that matters. So if we think that there is a significant impact, we're much more likely to give it some analysis and time discussing with others who would be able to help us get that well-rounded perspective. But it takes that self-reflection of realizing that this has far-reaching implications for our product or our user base. And I wasn't thinking about that in my first example, so it just seemed so simple to get what I wanted. All right, well, thanks so much for coming. We
Thank
really
you.
enjoyed having you.
Thank you.